Before we get to tonight's program, there are a few people and organizations I would like to thank. We are grateful to this season's sponsor, Comcast, as well as to our partner bookseller, Uncle Bobby's, and our media partner, the Philadelphia Citizen. And finally, I'd like to thank the volunteers, a dedicated group of library patrons whose loyalty to this program is unmatched. We are so grateful for their support. Tonight, we welcome Michele Norris, who is the editor. Yes, absolutely. I love that kind of enthusiasm at our author events. Michele Norris is the editor-in-chief of Electric Literature, winner of the Whiting Literary Magazine Prize. She's the first Black openly trans woman to helm a major literary publication. An Out 100 honoree, she has been supported by MacDowell, Tin House, and the Kimbilio Center for African American Fiction, and appears in McSweeney's, American Short Fiction, and Zora. She is co-host of the critically acclaimed podcast Food for Thought, and holds an MFA from Sarah Lawrence College. She will be speaking with us tonight about her powerful debut novel, When the Harvest Comes. She will be joined in conversation by Emma Copley Eisenberg, who is the author of the novel Housemates, which was a national bestseller and named Best Book of the Year by the Boston Globe, People, and NBC, among others. Her narrative nonfiction book, The Third Rainbow Girl, was a New York Times notable book and editor's choice. She lives in Philadelphia, where she co-founded Blue Stoop, a community hub for the literary arts. Her short story collection, Fat Swim, is forthcoming from Hogarth in 2026. Please join me in welcoming Michele Norris and Emma Copley Eisenberg.
Hello. It's really amazing to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm going to start with a little reading, and I'm going to read from chapter 3 of When the Harvest Comes. And really, what you need to know is that the novel begins on Davis and Everett's wedding day. And Davis is a professional violist, and he has promised Everett that he would not be practicing the viola at all during the week of their wedding. And he has picked up his viola. For Davis, scales and arpeggios are like daily meditation. He can quiet his mind, turn his attention to observing, which is different than thinking. The stillness of his body, contrasted with the quick dexterity of his fingers, has a way of calming him, bringing steadiness. Davis had tried explaining this on their second date. Everett, who'd worn a deep blue button-down, tucked neatly into gray flat-front slacks, had laughed at the thought of playing scales every day. Don't you get bored of them? A question that normally might have hurt or offended Davis, instead amused him. He doesn't know the way his eyes glinted, having caught an errant ray from the restaurant's lighting. He doesn't know how his sudden smile, joyful yet slightly condescending, managed to capture the most tender sort of happiness that Everett had ever seen. What Davis does know, what he remembers, is how quickly he shook his head, how he leaned forward and really looked Everett in the eye. His boldness in that moment still delights him. He almost knocked his fork to the ground as he tried to explain the joy of scales, the beauty in setting aside time every day to go back to the beginning, to lose yourself in rote practice. Think of it like this. On a playground, you've got your slide, your tire swing, your seesaw, your jungle gym. They're bolted to the ground. They never move. One day, I slide down the slide. Then I run over to the tire swing, sit on top of it, and swing around in big, lopsided circles. Then I climb into the jungle gym where I crawl through the yellow plastic tube, but not the red plastic tube with the right angle, because I want to climb down the mini ropes course, and the red tube doesn't lead to that. Then I'll run over to the seesaw and ride that with my friend. The next day I'll start with the tire swing, but I'll turn it sideways so I can slide my legs through the hole in the middle and spin round and round like a top, rather than sitting on top of it swinging in lopsided circles. And then I'll go to the seesaw, but this time I'll sit on the other side so I can face the street instead of the school parking lot. I'll chase my friend up the giant slide because I'm not feeling gravity that day. And when I end at the jungle gym, I'll climb up the ropes course and walk the plank backward until I end up in the pirates' quarters. That's where I can steer the ship and look out over the rest of the playground. Do you see what I'm getting at? Before Everett could respond, Davis kept going. Every day, I have to play on that playground because it's the only playground my school has. That's the equipment. That's what I've got. But am I running around solo, or is it a giant game of TV tag? Am I running up the slide or sliding down it? Everything about how I use the playground is completely up to me. Nobody gets to tell me what to do. In the constraints, in the limitations of the playground, I find my freedom. Scales and arpeggios are the same way. I know the notes and they never change, so I have to get creative. Do I slur my F minor 3-octave scale in triplets going up and staccato and square eighth notes going down? Am I solo pianissimo in my A minor arpeggio today, or am I mezzo forte? Do I spiccato the bow in G major because it's a joyful key, and then go legato and molto adagio in F minor because it's dramatic and I'm playing Brahms in a recital that night? Davis sat back then, noticing that Everett's eyes had never strayed from his. It's very different from when I'm learning a piece, Everett. Scales and arpeggios, that's the playground. That's where I get to run and play and jump and be free. Wow, Everett said. You really took that metaphor and ran with it. Davis smiled and shrugged, suddenly bashful. Did I? Everett narrowed his eyes, but he smiled too as he did it. You've said all that before. Davis laughed. Swear to God, I came up with it on the spot. Davis watched Everett watching him as he crossed his legs, sat back, and brought his martini to his lips. They nearly closed the restaurant, and when the check came and Davis reached for it and Everett reached faster, Davis said, "But I asked you out." And Everett, with his big green eyes, glanced up as he pulled a credit card from his wallet and said nothing. When Davis started to pull his own credit card from his satchel, Everett, still staring, the movement barely perceptible, shook his head. Davis felt compelled to set the satchel down, and when he did, Everett smiled. Only then did Davis glance at his dessert plate, which still held a few bites of cinnamon apple pie. I don't even like pie, but this is so, so good. He sliced himself a small bite, speared it with his fork, and ate it. Then he looked at Everett again. You seem like a man of few words. He sliced another bite. Why do you say that? There was something mysterious in Everett's voice. You've been so quiet tonight. The waiter came and silently collected the check and the credit card. All the while, Everett's gaze went uninterrupted. That's more about you than it is about me. Are you saying I talk too much? Davis narrowed his eyes. Everett grinned. No, not at all. When Davis said nothing, Everett continued. I like how much you talk. I like your voice. He tilted his head to the side. So I listen. But I promise I'm not, he made air quotes, a man of few words. He blinked. I'm just a man. And then, after another few moments of silence, why? What are you thinking about? Davis closed his eyes and bit his lip. I was just... He paused, pensive. I don't think I know what that feels like. What feels like? The waiter returned, handing Everett the receipt and his credit card, smiling at them both, thanking one, then the other. Through all of this, Everett never moved his gaze from Davis. Davis leaned in close as Everett picked up the pen. To be like, I'm just a man. What does that feel like? Everett shrugged and furrowed his brow. He glanced down to sign the check. It doesn't feel like anything, really. It's just, I don't know, it just is. Thank you.
Okay, here she is. Wow, thank you so much. What a delight.
Thank you.
That's
it was
their
a pleasure.
first date, right?
That's technically their second date, but
Okay.
it depends on how you define date.
Ooh. Okay,
Yeah.
okay, we'll get into it. We'll get into it, don't worry. Okay, first I want to start by saying welcome back to Philadelphia.
Thank you.
Woo!
I'm really happy to be here.
What is it like to be back? I heard a rumor that you're very familiar with the Lush cosmetics store.
So for those who don't know, so Emma and I have known each other for 20 years. Let's just get that out there. And we met at Haverford College, right down the road.
Heard of it? Yeah.
Maybe you've heard of it. And I worked at Lush Cosmetics for a year when I lived in Philly before I started graduate school. I worked at the Walnut Street Theater full-time, and it paid very little money. And so I was applying to MFA programs in creative writing, and I worked at Lush. I had worked at a Lush in Cleveland anyway, and so when I moved to Philly, I got this job at the Lush here because I needed money to pay for my graduate school applications. And so I was there. I sold soap.
An honorable profession. Absolutely, yeah. What was your favorite item at Lush?
Oh God, the Buffy body bar.
Okay.
Absolutely, and it's still there, although
Yeah.
they used to make a big one, and now they only make the small one, and the small one disappears in 3 uses.
That's devastating.
Yeah.
Okay, related to the passage of time. No, this really is related to the passage of time. You worked on this book for 14 years, correct?
Correct.
So, yeah, hell yeah. So tell us about how the book changed over the course of those years, how you changed with it, how what you wanted to do with the book changed, et cetera. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting because as I've been talking about the book on this tour, I've realized that a lot of my original ideas and questions that I was looking at remained the same and remained at the core. I wanted to write a love story. I wanted to write a love story where a character that is often systematically devalued and sometimes unloved in various parts of various communities was at the center, was loved and cherished, where that was never in question really in the narrative. And, you know, in this relationship we have a white gay man, Everett, who's like late 30s, very sort of masculine, wealthy, comes from a family that sort of will remind you of the Kennedys. And we have a black partner, Davis, who's younger, in his mid-20s, very effeminate, and is this musician. And sometimes in those communities is a character that might be told, oh, you're not desirable, I'm not attracted to you, I'm not whatever. And so being in a relationship like this might expect to be very grateful to be in this relationship. And I had no interest in writing a novel with that kind of dynamic. I kind of wanted to flip it on its head. I was interested in the idea that he was so sort of loved and cherished in this relationship that he was the one who had the power to kind of mess it up. That there was no sense of like, I'm so grateful to be with you because of so many other things that are happening in his life, which is sort of part of what the book is about. So all of that stayed the same, but what changed over the years was just the craft of it, the structure of it. You know, some characters appeared later in the process. There were characters that I thought would be in the book that are not in the book. So it was really about like how I did it that constantly changed, and my sense of craft. I think there are choices about the book also that I made in some of those early years that are still in the book that have a lot to do with who I was at that time in my life and how I thought about writing at that time in my life. And now, you know, I've grown up a lot more. I have a lot more confidence in my writing ability. So if I was coming up with this novel today, there are things that maybe would be different, maybe.
Well, first of all, I love this audience. Denne says something deep and you're all like, yes. Like, so keep up that energy. Love that for us. But I think that it's really hard to write a love story, actually. Like, you've done something here that is not easy, and you can feel like Davis is evolving in his understanding of what love is over the novel. And like, you know, it's not that like there aren't beautiful love stories out there, and like obviously like romance is a huge booming beautiful genre and, you know, big in any bookstore, but like you've done something that I think is really difficult because it's very easy, I think, to hurt your characters or wound them, to create sources of tension. And certainly there's hurt. This book has been described as brutal like many times, which I actually have questions about. I'm not sure if I find it that brutal. I find it very loving. I find it very tender. I find it very full of love and joy and also life, you know. But I wonder how you approach writing love. Like, how do you find that sort of traditional Western idea of like conflict or tension when you're writing a love story, and how do you like veer away from tropes that we might see in a more romance, capital R? Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things about that. I think that the first thing for me, and this kind of goes into the conversation about genre in books and you know what's literary and what's not, but for me, for writing this love story, I felt like character had to be like the guiding light. It had to be, because no one was going to care about the love of these characters if you didn't care about these characters. And, you know, to my thinking, the way to get readers to care about characters and people on the page is to show their full humanity, to show the range of emotions that they're dealing with at any given moment, at any moment in time. And it's also to get, you know, readers to kind of, you know, understand characters' motivations, what they want, what they need. And so this is where I think that, like, even writing that's considered romance is more character-driven than I think people often give it credit for. I think character just is at the core of it. But in this novel, I really wanted to create this effect of when these two characters are together, and it's just them, it feels like they're in their own bubble. And it feels like they're kind of in their own universe, because they're so deeply tuned into each other, emotionally and physically. And so the joy, for me, or the fun maybe, I don't know if it was the joy, the fun of writing this love story was using everything else that I could use as a foil to begin to challenge this love story, but to sort of very clearly show that when it's just them, it feels like magic.
It does feel that way, and then like maybe also partly because the setting is so intimate. It's not, I don't think a spoiler because it's in the front to say that this is also about a wedding. It's like a weekend. It's an event. I love a party scene. Damn.
Yes.
Like what a fun
Yes.
wedding scene that this book has. I mean, it's long. It's like a wedding movement, really, and so
Yes.
fun. Yeah. But I wonder too. There's a lot of like texture and conflict within each character with himself about what it means to be married, what it means to be part of a family. I think one of the most interesting parts of the book is the interracial marriage, also coupled with the aspect of Everett being sort of more traditionally masculine, like you said, and Davis being red and being comfortable, being very feminine. And I wondered if there was a way, like, how did you approach thinking about gender in the book, actually? Because there's also a moment where two main characters, the white husband's father, Christopher. We must speak of Christopher. He's fascinating. He has this like insight of like, you know, I'm chill with my white son being gay, but if he were feminine, that would be harder for me. And so I wondered what it was like to write that risky moment and to really go deeper into like the POV of someone who feels that way. Yeah.
I had so much fun.
Oh yeah, okay, cool.
Writing that.
Yeah.
I had so much fun because, I mean, once I got that on the page, I was like, this, in a way, is like at the heart of this novel. This is what I've been writing at. And I just think, I don't feel like people talk about it that much, but I think that so often people's challenges with queerness gets down to the physical act of what's happening and the representation, the ways in which people often who aren't queer think about gender, or the ways that they project gender and gender performances onto the queer people in their lives that they're seeing. And so, like, here's an example.
Okay, yeah.
Many of us probably are familiar with the TV show Modern Family, right? And I love Modern Family. I think it's so funny. It's problematic, but what isn't? You know? Shout out to my amazing professor from college who taught me the word problematic, who's in the audience. Anyway, so if you think about the marriage between Mitch and Cam, or the relationship which eventually becomes a marriage between Mitch and Cam, the two characters, both of their fathers hate each other. And the reason why both of their fathers hate each other is because each of them, in order to cope with their son being in a gay relationship, has to feminize the other one in the relationship. They have to feminize the other man's son. Each of them has to think that the other man's son is the wife in order for them to like be comfortable with the relationship. And each of them hates seeing that man feminize their son. And so it's like a punchline in the show, but there's, you know, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 episodes where they're together. And you see this tension play out in all of these very, very funny ways. And so I remember I was already working on this book when I started to see those episodes, when those episodes aired. But I remember seeing that and being like, okay, thank God someone's doing something about this. And the show was just making light of it and wasn't really commenting on it or wasn't trying to like, you know, fix this in the world or anything, which is not its job. It's a sitcom. But the point is, I felt very affirmed, and I was like, what I'm writing towards and what I'm seeing and what I've experienced in my life and what I've seen in so many places is here, and it is worth writing about. And so that was really interesting. And so there's a way in which, you know, I changed and evolved and grew into my identity over the course of writing this novel, and the book changed and evolved and grew into what it was going to be over those 14 years. But even things that I didn't expect to happen until I got towards the end of the process in terms of what was going to happen in the book, what was going to happen on the page, the embers of those things were there from the beginning. And I think that's such an interesting thing about the process of trying to make art, is discovering what's inside of you that needs to come out onto the page if you're a writer. And as you know, get towards the stage of completing a piece of work, looking back and seeing the roadmap that you maybe couldn't see as you were doing it. But then you look back and you're like, oh, there's this and there's that, and here's this in my life. And you begin to see how it all comes together.
Yes, there's like so many versions and like so many past Dennes and past Davises and past Everetts in the story. I just feel like, yeah, maybe a lesser writer would have been like, this dad is like kind of a problem, and sort of offered him from the outside. But by going into his interiority, it was so rich and really unexpected, I thought. And same with Everett. So the husband to be gets a significant portion of the novel is narrated from within Everett's consciousness, and I wondered like why that move for you? Why did it feel important to have like a multi-voiced novel, and especially when thinking about foregrounding a Black queer character, as you began with, like why are we living in like the hot white man's brain? Yeah. Yeah.
I have been preparing for this question for years.
For all your life.
For all my life.
All your life.
I have trained and trained and trained. So the first thing for me is that I love point of view. I love point of view. I'm fascinated by point of view. I don't know that I will ever write a novel that is not in many points of view. Yeah. I also felt like, as much as Davis is, to me, and readers will say differently, but most readers are agreeing with this so far, that Davis is the centerpiece of this novel. I felt like if I was going to write a love story, like a true love story, I wanted to give them similar, if not fully equal, space and weight on the page. I was also always, from the beginning, very interested in the porousness between human beings and how to present that on the page. And when I say that, what I'm referring to, or what I'm thinking about, is there's the things that they're saying to each other, and there's the things that they're not saying to each other, and there's the things that they're saying to each other in ways that are nonverbal, and there's the things that they're maybe not saying to each other that are nonverbal. And then by going into their various characters' points of view, I get to give the reader insight that characters on the page may not be getting, and I'm fascinated with the dynamics of all of that, and I'm interested in that. It's intimate, yes, and it's also intricate and complicated, and for me, it's really rich, fertile ground, and that's the benefit of writing in multiple points of view. And the challenge that I gave myself, I don't know if I used this quite like this language, because again, this was a long time ago, but the challenge that I did give myself, and it can be up to you in terms of whether or not I was successful, but the challenge that I gave myself was to make it so that this felt, to an extent, like an equitable love story, where everyone who needed their own point of view represented on the page got it, but also Davis is still the center of the story. That was like a technical challenge that I wanted to take on.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think it does feel that way, and it feels like we also get to see Everett's fear and insecurity and questions about what it means, again, to be married or to be with someone who is struggling in a lot of ways. And without that, it's like how to understand a bond of two folks without that. There's like people that don't get, like, there's like a cousin who's like a real problem who doesn't get his own point of view, and I'm like, that seems right, like
yes. And that's not on the cutting room floor. That was never gonna happen.
He gets like locked in a room, and I was like, great, just lock the cousin away, as you should. But speaking of the idea of like nonverbal intimacy and the way they communicate, I feel like there's two we must address. One is the viola and music, and the other is sex. And so we'll work our way that way.
I like this plan.
Yes. So also I know about you, since we're buddies, that you were a very accomplished, classically trained string musician, and that part of your life is still important. And I wondered, it's so difficult to write music in prose. Like you read a section that's it's Davis trying to articulate what it feels like to play music to the person he's going to fall in love with, which is really special. And I wondered, like, hard though, are there many passages on the cutting room floor of music writing? Did you listen to music? I heard a rumor there's a playlist. How do we get it? Yeah.
Yes, there is a play. We gotta talk to Will. We gotta talk to my marketing guy, because I don't know. I think it just I have it. Anyway, we'll get it out there to you. We will, because it's a good playlist. I think it's very good. I always listen to music when I'm writing. Always. Not always when I'm editing, and I also don't have to listen to music when I'm writing nonfiction, actually. So I should clarify that. But when I'm writing fiction, I'm always listening to music, and very often what happens is I discover a piece of music. Usually it's instrumental, but sometimes it has lyrics. It makes me feel a certain way. I start seeing things. Settings, potentially, weather events, like whatever it is that can help me kind of begin to ground a story. I start seeing things, and language just starts sort of arriving for me, and then I put that piece of music on repeat, and it might be on repeat for like 3 or 4 hours. It might be on repeat for like 6 months. It depends. As long as it's generating for me, it stays a part of the process, and then I keep it in case I go back to it if I'm continuing to work on whatever I wrote during it, perhaps. So that's just a part of my process. Writing the viola content was not as difficult as I thought it was going to be. But arriving at the fact that Davis was going to be a violist was a real journey. I always knew that Davis would be a musician. And when I first was starting this novel, I thought Davis would play the cello, sort of selfishly because I love the cello, but I never played the cello. And then, one of my favorite authors is the writer Elizabeth Strout, and one time I heard her say somewhere, "Is there anything more mournful than a cello?" And I was like, those are the vibes. That's the vibes of this book. We're dealing with grief and death and loss. Mournful. Davis plays the cello. And initially, I was going to have Davis have gone to music school and sort of stopped playing the cello for some amorphous reason. And so I was maybe going to have him work in a soap store, because I just didn't know what else to do. I was like, let's put him in a soap store. I know soap. And Everett was also going to be the financial breadwinner of this family. And Davis was going to have to depend on Everett financially. And as I was working through early pages of this novel, I was less and less interested in that dynamic, and I became so much more interested in the idea of Davis being a successful musician, being a rising star, not needing Everett's money because he's making his own money, or will soon be making quite a bit of money doing this. And that became much more interesting to me and was so much more in line with my initial vision of sort of where this book would go for Davis. And so then I was like, Davis should be a violinist, because it's that we know of violinists or soloists who are playing for orchestras all over the world. That just seemed like much easier. And I know, the violin repertoire and everything. So I was like, we can do that. But that didn't quite fit. And as I got through the novel and I began to understand where the novel was going to go and where the narrative was going to go, it did become very clear to me that Davis could only be a violist for very specific reasons that are specific and unique to the instrument of the viola. And I won't give any of it away. It's in the book. It's very clear. But one of the questions that I've also gotten a lot on this tour so far is like, how much research did you have to do? Because it's quite, like, my knowledge on the viola is quite extensive on the page here. And it's fun to be able to tell people I didn't do any. I didn't have to do a lick of research about the viola for this novel.
You're like, my life was the research.
My life. I had been, it turns out I'd been training for that moment too.
Yeah. 14 years, yeah. I mean, right, I like the idea that you're like, it's a mournful viola spoiler. You've got to get in there and find out.
Yes.
Okay, love that. And I've recently learned that on TikTok, there's like a chili pepper spectrum for sexiness in books. Have you heard of this?
No.
I believe it's 5 chili peppers from 1 to 5. And I would call this like a 4 chili pepper.
What do I got to do to get that 5th chili pepper?
You know.
I do know.
You do know
I do
what
know.
you would have to do. But 4 is very good. Yeah. And
4 is very
the
spicy.
novel opens in a very chili pepper way. And
Yes.
I remember, like, I think we had a drink or something, and you were like, well, kissing Reese's book club goodbye.
I was fully, my team was like, yeah, we've sent it to all the major book clubs, but we're not hopeful for this one.
But it's a joke.
No offense to Reese.
No offense to Reese. We stand. But I was like, it's a beautiful and fun and like really sensual choice to open in this like really hot but also loving moment with these 2 characters, and they have like a fantastic sex life throughout the novel. And I wondered what was important to you about writing sex. Who do you read that's writing sex in interesting ways? Because I feel like a lot of people are just really like scared and don't know how to write sex well. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I felt like I had to get brave about writing sex because in my sort of most basic understanding of the conflict of this novel, from the beginning, sex was such an important part of that I was like, one of my teachers at Sarah Lawrence, where I did my MFA, she sat me down one day and she said, listen, because at Sarah Lawrence you do these one-on-ones with your professors every other week, and so she would be looking at new pages every other week, and so she finally sat me down and she said, listen, do not come back here in 2 weeks if you have not written a sex scene. Like, you need to do it. Mary Morris, her novel The Red House, is coming out next month. Anyway, so I had to get brave and I had to do it. But yeah, it was really, I learned a lot about writing by getting serious about writing sex, because the thing is that usually on the page, it's not about the sex. Yeah. It's another way of illustrating communication, of illustrating interiority for characters. And so it just builds character. And it's a way into an individual's most private, tender, delicate moments, or rough, or brutal, or however, whatever it is that you're writing. And so it's just a window into their soul. Now, I'll tell you this. When my agent and I sent the novel to publishers, that scene was not the first scene of the book. It was the second.
You tricked them. Yeah.
And my agent is also a gay man. So this is interesting about how we, I guess, think about straight people. My agent and my writing group had said to me, I'm in a queer writing group, and they had said, you should put the sex scene first. And when I sent it to my agent, I sent it to him with it first. And I was like, I don't know though, Robert, what do you think? Like, can editors and people handle that? I don't know. And he was like, yeah, my assistant was thinking the same thing. I was thinking the same thing. Let's just move it back. Let's just move it back. If you're more comfortable, let's move it back. And I said, okay, let's switch it back. And so what is now the second chapter was the first chapter, which opens in the point of view of Davis's father, the Reverend. So when, we went through the process of selling the book, I had my first editorial call with my editor a few weeks later. And the first thing she said when she sat down was, so you're going to switch those 2 scenes, right?
But she's a lesbian.
Well, the first editor was not.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Right, because the first editor, because there's turnover in publishing like there is anywhere. So my first editor,
right. Okay,
yes,
okay,
my
yeah.
first editor was a very buttoned up, young, straight white woman,
You're right. Okay.
and I was shocked. And she was like, "So you're gonna do it?" And I was like, "That's so funny. I almost did, and so now I'll do it." And so that's how it ended up being. But I think it was really important because it space is weight in writing. Another great lesson that I learned from Joan Silber, who was a wonderful faculty member of mine at Sarah Lawrence. Space is weight. That works in multiple ways in writing fiction, both where you place something in the arc of the narrative and also how much space it gets in the arc of the narrative. And so it's not a ton of space. Like, I wasn't trying to write a novel where like half the pages are sex scenes, but it's important space, and it tells you that this is an important part or what it hopefully tells you is that this is an important part of this relationship, and it's an important part of this story. And it also harkens back to, something that I used to think about a lot when I was in college, which was that, if you were going to accept me wholly, if you were going to accept my queerness, you had to be able, if you were a friend, you had to be able to deal with and cope with conversations about the most intimate parts of my life. Even I couldn't be best friends with someone who was uncomfortable hearing me talk about my sex life, or at that point, lack thereof. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's just a guiding sort of thing. And I definitely approached this book in the same way.
Yeah. And it does seem essential. I mean, I feel like we've talked about this before too, that it's like, right, with the space, the way that you are directing a reader's attention is what you want them to care about, what you care about as the writer. And it's essential to understanding the dynamic between Davis and Everett, and also, the ways you're really in nuanced ways talking about, about gender within queer relationships. Without that, it would be so odd, I think. And it just feels central to what binds them together, and also, in a way, what ends up, being their trouble spots. So to kind of gloss over their physical intimacy would feel so strange. But people do that. There's a lot of just kind of like omission of like, and then they close the door and it's like fade to white, and you're like, but what happened? Come on.
And it's like,
it's
why?
a missed opportunity.
It's a missed opportunity.
Yeah.
It's such fertile ground.
Yeah.
It is such fertile ground. I don't know why people do that. And I will say it's been interesting, now that the book is out, hearing things in terms of the way people are talking about it. And there's a lot of there's like on some podcasts, there's open door sex scenes. And that's not a phrase I ever knew until a week ago.
I remember hearing about it in my MFA with a visiting writer, and he was like, there's two camps of writers, open door and closed door. And it's the people who are like fade to black. And then there's people that are like, no, this is an opportunity. I want to show it. And so I love that about you.
I will always be an open door writer.
Yeah.
What it's not to criticize the ways other people think about it, but what is the point of writing? Fiction is where we get to get into other people's heads, get into other people's experiences. It's where we get to experience the world through eyes and in a body that is not our own. What is the purpose of doing that, of making that kind of art and then closing the door?
Yeah.
For your reader.
Indeed. I think too, in a related way, I feel like your open door, not just with sex, but with feeling and with deep moments of all the emotions, really. Sadness, joy, connection, despair. It's all in there. And I feel like there's kind of a trend in often this moment in sort of contemporary literary fiction of the sort of very slight, wry, satirical, gives no fucks kind of narrator. And it was so lovely to live in a consciousness and a vision where real feeling is present, And I think we talked about this. I had an index card over my desk that was asking when I'm writing, is there enough real feeling? So how do you think about that question of rendering these big emotions, again, back to the way that people are talking about this book as at times quite brutal? How do you deal with that but avoid that sort of terrible sentimentality word? How do you navigate that?
It's really, one thing that's funny is that in the early days of writing this novel and in the early days of writing period, especially when I was at Sarah Lawrence, I was like, oh, sentimentality, who cares about that? Put in all the emotions, all the feelings. I was like, I'm not scared of it. And I have approached the writing that way, but now that the book is out and people talk about it, I'm like, oh God, do I want to be called sentimental? It has at moments made me very nervous. But I've gotten back to that place of not caring because, I mean, I had to get myself back there.
Yeah.
It's a ride publishing a book. It is an emotional roller coaster. It is intense. But, you know, I did have to get myself back to that place because I just wasn't, no shade to the sort of wry without feeling trend in literary fiction.
We can shade them a little. Yeah.
I'm not interested in it. And I also think, I think that most of the time those books are written by a particular subset of people. And my feeling is I guess that's nice that you can move through life and not have to process your feelings and not have to deal with them and not have to address them or put them on anyone else ever. Maybe too many people are in therapy. I don't know. But I just am not writing from that aesthetic. I'm not interested in it. I didn't feel that it applied to me or my identity or the way that I move through the world. And then the other thing is that I started writing this novel at a time when I was dealing with really big feelings. I started writing this novel less than a year after my father died very suddenly when I was in my MFA program. And this novel grew out of an exercise that I gave myself. I had been producing work that first year in my MFA program, and everyone kept saying it was good. But I would not really revise anything. I would write a short story, I'd be like, okay, I'd revise it a little bit to get the grade, and then I would move on to the next story. And I was really concerned about this because nothing held my attention for me to do intense, serious work on it. And these stories were not publishable. And so I was like, how am I going to reach my goal if I'm not interested in revising any of these stories? And so I really was quite worried and thought that perhaps I should just quit my MFA program and go to law school, which was always my backup plan.
What?
Yeah, I was always like, oh, I still say all the time, I'm like, I could have just gone to law school, made a bunch of money. I say this all the time. But so I gave myself a challenge. So then my dad died a month into the program, and I was sort of writing in a haze for a year. And so that summer I left, and I was like, I don't know that this is the right thing for me. And I did a couple workshops over the summer, one called VONA, which is for writers of color, where I worked with a writer named M. Evelina Galong, and then one called the New York State Summer Writers Institute. And that's where I actually started this novel. And the idea came to me to try and write something that was very close to my own lived experience so that I wouldn't spend any energy trying to convince anyone of its accuracy or its truthfulness. And then I could use that energy that was spent on doing other things to just put emotions and feelings into my work and see if I could write something that I cared about. And that's where it came from. And it started immediately. And I got back to Sarah Lawrence, and I went to my thesis advisor, and I said, I think this is why I am a writer, is to write this story. So I'm all about the feelings.
Bless. And I think it's too late to go to law school now.
It is too late. The train has left the station.
The train has left the station, and God bless, yeah. Okay, so I have one small little question, and then it looks like it's time to hear from you all, so get your questions percolating for Denne. My last and final question is, what is the most essential writing snack?
Oh.
Important.
God, there's so many.
Chicken fingers.
Chicken finger. That's like a meal, though, for me.
That's true.
When I'm writing, I really like to have a glass of red wine, and if I've really given myself the space in the day, and some lightly salted almonds for protein, and a few pieces of dark chocolate for a little bit of something sweet.
That's so bougie. I love that for you.
It's so bougie. Yeah. I'm so bougie. When I don't have those things on hand, I think popcorn is really great. Oh. Buttered popcorn, like extra butter, a little extra salt. Yeah.
I love your bougie side. Okay, I think that folks, there's a microphone coming around. Perhaps you wish to ask Denne a question about anything, and I will call on you if I can see. You have to wait for the microphone to come to you, I've been told to say.
Hi, Queen.
Hi.
This is following, per usual. Can Can you talk about, so first, like, I know there's this sort of persistent thought that gay people don't get married, or like, it's very, just not getting married. And then, like, interracial relationships, like how that sort of plays into the work and they navigate that as like human beings. Because that's like a whole thing by itself.
Yeah. It is complicated. It is absolutely complicated. Yeah, I certainly didn't sit down to write a novel that disabused anyone of any notions about queer people or anything else. If people think that gay people don't get married, then they're stupid, because there was a whole political movement about it, and there was a whole last president that was elected because people were upset about it. So that's crazy. Like let's live on planet Earth. But but I was like, I didn't feel like that was my job. I will tell you that actually in early pages, I didn't plan on having them be married. That was a craft decision, because when I was leaving Sarah Lawrence and I handed in my thesis, the opening scene, they were moving in together, and that was the big relationship moment that was going to sort of like be challenged by what ends up happening with Davis's family. And so that's where we were. And as I was writing, I was just like, oh, I've got to up the stakes. Like, I've got to up the stakes. I've got to make sort of readers care about this even more. I've got to make it feel like if this thing might come crumbling down, it's not just, okay, well, let's split up and move out. It is like these people have dedicated their lives to each other. They are getting married. Like, that was a craft choice. And in terms of the interracial aspect of it, that was a really interesting thing to sort of try and tackle, because, well, first of all, when I said earlier that like I might do some things differently if I was starting this novel today, that was one of the aspects that I was talking about, because at the time of my life, at the time that I was writing, that I started this, with the conflict that felt like it was at the center of the novel, that does have to do with their sex life, I could not imagine a man of color responding to Davis in the way that I felt like a white man would, and in the way that Everett does. And so that didn't seem believable to me. And so I was like, well, he has to be white. And it's fine to make those decisions that way, and part of writing fiction is trying to, convince your reader of the believability of whatever it is that you've done. But at this point in my trajectory, I have so much more faith in my ability as a writer. And so that would probably be a fun challenge. I'd be like, I don't even know if that assumption is true, that a man of color wouldn't respond that way. But if I felt like they might not respond in the way that Everett responds, I would be like, okay, well, let's do it. Let's like do that on the page and make it believable, because it's so much about character and it's about individuals. The goal is for these characters to read as real individual people, right, who make choices. And so, the business of writing fiction, I think, is taking things that are extraordinary or might be unbelievable, and making them believable. I mean, there's people in the world who think I don't exist. So, and here I am. So,
Poof. Magical. I think there's questions over here. Sorry, it's hard to see. Hey, Denne.
Hi.
So a book is often a time capsule of like who we were. Mm-hmm. And I saw that your book tour is taking you to Ohio, taking you to back to your hometown. Mm-hmm. So do you have any feelings around returning home with this book that was like a 14-year journey?
Yes.
Will you share them?
Not to put all of my feelings on this audience. I have a better relationship with Ohio and Cleveland at this moment in my life than I have for many years, just because I've spent a lot more time there the last few years. So I'm actually kind of excited about it now, but it's true that there was a time when it made me very nervous to think about the process of, or the possibility of taking this book back to Ohio, of reading from it. There's, most of the book doesn't take place in Ohio, but a very important section of it does take place in Ohio, and in the suburbs of Cleveland, to be exact. So it's definitely, it feels fraught. It's going to be interesting to take it back to Ohio, knowing that my father has been gone since 2010. Like, that's just definitely going to be interesting. And, but it's part of the job, and I'm happy to do it. Honestly, a lot of people don't get book tours, so I'm happy to go wherever they want me to go. Like, let's do it.
Piali.
Hi, it is so lovely to hear you talk about your book, and thank you for being here. It's been so great to hear you talk about the journey this book has been on, partially because maybe some of us are also working on a debut novel for well over 10 years, and it's a real journey. And I'm really interested in hearing you talk about the ways in which your craft choices changed over that period of time, because one of the things, and you were just talking about this in one of your other responses, but one of the things you were saying is that you were having to up the stakes as in craft choices as you moved along. That's something that I've been thinking about a lot, and I'm at a point now where I'm thinking about what does it mean for us to, one of the comments that I think we hear as we move through drafts of novels is, where are the stakes? What are the stakes? How are you upping the stakes? And I'm wondering, what does it mean for us to keep giving, especially our characters of color, more stakes to have to prove themselves on, and more, and also grappling with the flip side of that question, which is that, like, I really enjoy fiction that has really high stakes, all of those things put together. I'm just wondering how you thought about that over the course of your time working on this.
That's a great question. So it's really interesting because as writers who are coming from marginalized backgrounds, I think as writers of color, as queer writers, for me specifically as a trans writer, what gets complicated is that, we want to write a great story and we've got to give the character stakes, but also we want to be careful about potentially traumatizing our characters and traumatizing readers, and, using those kinds of tropes in ways that are unseemly. It's a fine line to walk, and it's a challenge that we face that a lot of other writers don't face in the same way. And you're adding to that the burden of potentially of representation and being expected to speak for a community. And so my advice is that you have to do your best to let that go. It is enough to try and write a good piece of writing. That is difficult enough. You cannot take on all of the extra noise. The way to handle that is actually, for the most part, not on the page at all. It's in literary citizenship, I think. Because a lot of those challenges that I'm talking about that we have to deal with as marginalized writers, they get to become less challenging as more of us get the opportunity to write and to publish and to be paid for that work. So my feeling is that you write the best work that you write, that you can write. And I do believe in being kind to readers on the page and being kind to your characters. And that was very important to me in this novel. And it's a matter of craft to figure out how to do it in a way that allows you to be as brutal on the page as you need to be, while also maintaining that sense of compassion as an author who's putting words on the page. But that is our job. And then the other part of our job is doing everything we can to open opportunities for so many more people, because that pressure gets lifted from us, the more of us that get to do this work.
I love that. And I just saw today, too, that Samira Wiley said, did you see this? That she's not going back to do the next season of Handmaid's Tale. She was like, I can't do it. Like, I can't do it, and I don't want to do it, and I don't want to do it as a Black woman. Like,
I love
I'm
that.
done. Yeah.
In
Just
this
interesting.
time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Okay, we have time for one more question. Teresa, you need a microphone, though. Yes, there you go.
I do need a microphone, and I have to apologize. This is not going to be a question. I'm just going to say a lot of things that I love about this, and a lot of things I love, but I'm only about a quarter way through because I wanted to get the book from my local kind of like woman of color owned bookstore, and they sold out immediately, so I had to wait. So I got it yesterday, right? Yeah, no, for real. So I got it yesterday, and I opened it up when I was waiting for a burrito, and I was like, whew, clutching my pearls, like, you know, kind of like. Yeah, I think 5 chilies. Like, you're going to have to tell me, yeah. But
Okay.
so
Okay.
a couple of things. One of the things so many things that I love already, but I feel like that conversation about the viola is such a beautiful reflection on practices of interpretation, how interpretation can be an exhaustible fund. And I was thinking this would be a really great chapter to teach, kind of like for first year writing, in terms of what is going on with, and I was like, could I actually teach this book? And because like we would have to get through the first chapter. And I was also thinking, okay, actually, because I try to have a sense of what students are reading. And so they're reading a lot of fan fiction. So it's like, let me check out this fan fiction. And when I read the fan fiction, I'm just like, this is so interesting because there are so many tropes that are getting recycled for people who may or may not have actually experienced sex. And could there be a learning goal in the first year writing class to be kind of like, how can we be embodied in a way that invites the full possibility of pleasure? I don't know if I can get that past kind of like the educational policy committee, but I think in terms of what this book opens up, in terms of, and again, absolutely, I want to be embodied as Davis. I want to wear the backless couture kind of like jumpsuit, kind of like within it. But I just so much love the world that you're creating, and it is making me think about whether I can pitch my next writing seminar as a Haverford kind of like author, kind of like series, kind of like for students, because that would be so badass in terms of all the different ways in which I see Emma, your work, Denne, your work, Hillary's work, in ways that I think are really about opening up new worlds of possibility, which is what I need so much at this moment. And again, I was going to try to just read your work as kind of like, here's going to be my escapism. But then I started taking out my pencil. It's like, oh, here's a beautiful lyric passage. Kind of like within it. So just thank you so much, because this just could not arrive at a more necessary time. So thank you so much for sharing that vision and opening these doors of possibility for us. And yeah, thank you for keeping those doors open. So yeah.
My heart. Ladies and gentlemen, my beloved undergrad thesis advisor and mentor.
Give it up for professors and teachers everywhere. Okay.
Yeah.
Congratulations. What a beautiful
Thank
book.
you.
I think that the Free Library is going to wrap us up. We're going to move upstairs. You're going to sign books.
Yes. Yes.
So thank you to Uncle Bobby's for providing those books. Daniel, take it away. Yes.
Thank you. That concludes this evening's program. There are, in fact, books for sale up in the lobby, though they have gone extremely quickly. There are only 6 copies left, so don't delay if you want one and have not gotten one. It attests to the power of this incredible book and this incredible conversation. Could we have one more round of applause for these speakers?